A Fox News alert, a remarkable scene in Asia today. First of all, you're looking at live pictures of Anchorage, Alaska, where the 3 U.S. citizens detained by the North Korean government are flying out. They're on their way back from North Korea. They were released by the regime there ahead of a summit meeting with President Trump. The prisoners were accompanied by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. They'll be landing at Joint Base Andrews right outside Washington, D.C. overnight. The president said he will meet them there. Just a few minutes ago, they made it back, as you're seeing now, to American soil. That's the second plane taking off. Fox Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry has details on what we're watching. Ed?
Tucker, good to see you. A major coup for President Trump as his new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is coming home from his second secret trip to North Korea in recent weeks with a major foreign policy victory in tow. It caps a dramatic day of diplomacy. These images that you mentioned, the last few moments, the 3 previously imprisoned Americans landing with Pompeo in Anchorage for that refueling stop. They're on separate planes because the larger plane has medical facilities for these 3 Americans to make sure they're okay. They will be at Joint Base Andrews, as you mentioned, just a few hours from now, landing in the middle of the night after days of ups and downs, some uncertainty about whether this was really happening after Secretary of State spent 90 minutes meeting with Kim Jong-un and then returned to his hotel. Reporters at the hotel asked Pompeo if the Americans were coming home. He crossed his fingers because it was still not a done deal until a North Korean official soon arrived to say these Americans were indeed free. The 3 of them, you can see them there, Tony Kim, Kim Hak-sung, and Kim Dong-chul, appear to be in good health, which is a big deal because of the heartbreak we all felt after Otto Warmbier was released from North Korea only to die shortly thereafter because of the horrific way he was treated by the communist nation. So the focus tonight is on these 3 free Americans. So the president is already looking ahead at how this sets the table for his summit with Kim that is likely coming in early June. The president saying today this will be a great moment for the entire world. A short time ago, the president tweeted, quote, looking forward to greeting the hostages, no longer hostages, at 2 a.m. Fox News will be there. I'm going to be hosting live coverage in the middle of the night. The president, we expect Vice President Mike Pence as well, greeting them on American soil. 1 year ago, the president's critics were charging his hot rhetoric was going to start a nuclear war. Instead, that tough talk is bringing home 3 Americans and teeing up a possible peace summit, Tucker.
Ed Henry, remarkable story, unexpected story. Yep. Thanks for that. The release, obviously a good sign. How optimistic should the rest of us be, though, for long-term peace in the Korean Peninsula? Where is this headed? Harry Kazianis is Director of Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest and a specialist in North Korea. He joins us tonight. So, Harry, where is this going?
You know, the pictures are mind-blowing, that the photo ops are amazing, but I'm still a little skeptical. And I think we have a lot of reason here to still be skeptical, Tucker. Think about it this way. Kim Jong-un is the equivalent of Michael Corleone literally being dropped into a country and running his own private fiefdom. They sell drugs around the world. They counterfeit U.S. dollars. The Kim family is literally responsible for the death of millions of North Koreans and South Koreans if you lump in the Korean War. So we have reason to be skeptical. However, I am a little bit optimistic the situation might be a little bit different. We have to remember that the North Koreans are under tremendous pressure. This maximum pressure campaign is completely different than what we've seen before because we actually have buy-in from the Chinese this time. Now, in previous attempts when we've tried to put a lot of pressure on the North Koreans, the Chinese would enforce the sanctions for a couple weeks, few months, then they would drop off. This time, they've actually been a lot more consistent in applying the pressure that we need to box the North Koreans in. So now I think it's the time to strike. I'm very skeptical. History screams out to us to be skeptical, but I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was.
And yet they're releasing these 3 American citizens. Who are they and under what pretext were they held?
Well, I think a lot of it is basically, one of the gentlemen, I believe, was a farmer, another was a professor, another was an entrepreneur. And a lot of these people are going to North Korea because they want to try and do good. They're working in universities. They're trying to build people-to-people connections. That's a smart idea. I think it's good that they've been released. But there's a question I just can't get out of my mind, Tucker. What does Kim Jong-un want for his nuclear weapons? That's the cloud that's hanging over this whole summit. Does he want $100 billion? I mean, it's obvious he wants security guarantees. He wants his regime to be secure. That's the question we need to ask, and I hope that President Trump is asking that.
Is it fair to assume that that rhetoric that Ed Henry was referring to earlier from last year that was so widely criticized, President Trump just took it right verbally to the North Korean regime and was denounced as kind of a lunatic by Americans here? That seems to have borne fruit in a way that previous efforts haven't. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I think the rhetoric is important, but I think the policies have made a difference here. Because at the end of the day, Tucker, even if we can't get Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear weapons, we have a policy that would work. And we've talked about this before. It's called containment. That's really all what maximum pressure is. It's containment on steroids. We box the North Koreans in. They don't want to give up their nuclear weapons? Fine. We've dealt with other countries that have had nuclear weapons in the past that are a threat to us. Soviet Union had thousands of nuclear weapons. We handled that effectively. We can do this. So we have the right policies. We're not yet on the brink of nuclear war like we talked about last year. We're safe. We're okay. It's a bad threat. It's an existential threat, but we know how to handle these threats.
Impressive. Really, I don't think anyone would have predicted this at all. Harry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Stay with Fox News Channel for live coverage of the homecoming of those three hostages. It's throughout the night. Ed Henry hosting, as you just heard. And we've got another Fox News alert for you on this busy news day. Lawyers representing Trump attorney Michael Cohen say that Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, has been spreading demonstrably false information about Cohen. They say that some of the wire transfers Avenatti highlighted are allegedly from a different Michael Cohen. He got the wrong Michael Cohen, they say, and apparently they're right. Still, Cohen's lawyers, the correct Michael Cohen's lawyers, concede that some of those records are real and that Avenatti should not have had access to them. Is financial information now fair play as long as it's being used to hurt a political enemy? That appears to be the new lesson today from Washington. Stormy Daniels' lawyer has confidential bank statements. And so the question is, how did he get them? Whose custody were they in? We don't know because Avenatti won't reveal that. The Treasury Department Inspector General's office has announced it is launching a probe to find out. Andrew McCarthy is, of course, a former assistant U.S. attorney. He writes widely on these subjects and is read avidly by many, and he joins us tonight. Mr. McCarthy, thanks for coming on.
Tucker, thanks for having me.
It's a narrow question, but it's a meaningful one. How do you get a hold of somebody's bank records? I thought they were supposed to be private.
Well, they're sure supposed to be private. A lot of stuff that happens in investigations is supposed to be private, like grand jury material. According to the attorney for Cohen, he was given commitments by government prosecutors that to the extent they had financial information of his, that would remain confidential. So if the IG from the Treasury Department is opening an investigation, that's a pretty good sign that they think it came from the government.
Well, so could the government leak my medical records or my home address or the name of my kid's school? I mean, is there a limit to the private information that can be leaked if they don't like you?
Tucker, they've been leaking classified national defense information since before the 2016 election, and we had torrents of it around Trump's election. So the point being, if they can leak things that are important to them, why on earth wouldn't they be able to leak things that are important to you?
Well, that's a very smart point. And yet at the same time, paradoxically, and you've written about this, they're withholding information from the public on the grounds that it might affect or harm American national security. And it's starting to seem like maybe they're withholding information in order to protect themselves, things that we should know about, we don't know about because of CYA. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it is fair. I mean, you know, look, there's probably not one silver bullet answer to why they do everything, and I'm certain that there are national security. I mean, look, we're talking about FISA court proceedings, intelligence information. There are going to be methods and sources and stuff that we get from foreign intelligence services. There's no doubt about it. But the thing we have to be mindful of is every time they've been pressed, when they say national security or investigative integrity is the reason that they have to withhold something, what we find when we finally peel it back and get to see it is that they're protecting either their own very flawed, sometimes decision-making processes, embarrassment, or exculpatory information. So you really have to be skeptical when they say we need to hold this for national security reasons.
So I'd be interested in your take on the Cohen story. I mean, nothing about Michael Cohen, to be honest, would shock me. Right. But it's hard to assess in the early hours of a story like this how significant it is. What do you make of this?
Well, the thing I keep telling myself is that Mueller voluntarily gave this case to a different prosecutor. I can't imagine if he thought that Cohen was the key to establishing some kind of connection between Russia and Trump, that he would ever have let this case walk to a different prosecutor. Yeah. So what I think is what I've thought from the beginning, which is it's a Southern District of New York case, my old office here in Manhattan. They are probably looking at a lot more than a campaign finance violation. But with Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, having told the president that he's not a target, I think we should assume until we see otherwise that this is a case about Cohen.
It sure seems like a case about Cohen.
Right.
So you're reading all these this speculation about how Cohen's going to turn on the president. Is that a concern? And if he did, what would he say?
You know, I always say the same thing when that question comes up about anybody, which is, sure, you can pressure Manafort, you can pressure Cohen, you can pressure all these people, but the only time it's effective to have somebody flip on somebody else is if they have anything incriminating on them. And if they don't,
Good point.
you know.
No, this is why people read you so avidly, because it's wise. Thank you, Andy McCarthy. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Democratic Party still grappling with the downfall of the Attorney General of the state of New York, Eric Schneiderman. That happened the day before yesterday. The question is, how many people knew about Schneiderman, what he was really like, before the rest of us found out? Probably quite a few. That's next. In the wake of Eric Schneiderman's resignation as Attorney General of New York, some of his longtime friends on the left are professing shock. You've heard them. We just can't believe it, they say. How could a man so publicly committed to feminism beat women? It just doesn't make sense. But of course, it makes perfect sense. Self-righteousness is always a marker for secret creepiness. The people yelling the loudest are usually hiding the most. Keep that in mind the next time you hear some Democratic politician lecturing you about your moral inferiority. That's the guy you need to watch carefully. Chances are he's up to something awful behind closed doors. Hypocrisy isn't just a feature of modern liberalism, it's the heart of modern liberalism. Ever wonder how people who advocate for abortion can say they stand for children? How a movement that demonizes an entire race can claim to oppose racism? The same way Al Gore can travel by private jet while trying to ban your SUV. Because consistency does not matter to the left. Only virtue matters. We're good people, therefore we must rule. You are not, therefore you must obey. Al Gore doesn't believe he's a hypocrite. Eric Schneiderman probably doesn't think he is either. You can't commit sin if your intentions are pure, and liberals believe their intentions are the purest. If that sounds like theology and not public policy, that's because it is theology. Modern liberalism is a religious movement. It's a replacement for the Protestant Christianity that the left works so hard to undermine and destroy. Liberals are speaking the language of faith, albeit a faith without God. This is the main reason that right and left talk past each other. The reason our public debates are so weird and unsatisfying. One side arrives with facts and stats and arguments. The other brags about its decency. One side is trying to convince, the other is trying to convert. You can beat a liberal in an argument, but you can never convince him that you won. He cares much more deeply than you do, and therefore he knows he's right, by definition, and nothing can convince him otherwise. Somewhere tonight, Eric Schneiderman is marinating in his shame, probably unshaven and alone. His career is over, his reputation is destroyed. He faces years of potential legal action. He is a broken man. He is in agony. And yet, on some level, despite all of that, Eric Schneiderman still knows he's a better person than you are. Seth Barron is associate editor of City Journal. He predicted in public on Twitter that Schneiderman would be exposed as a creep, and he said it last November. Yesterday, he tweeted this: "How did I know this and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio didn't?" Great question. We've asked him to come on and explain. Seth Barron joins us tonight. Seth, how did you know that? That was a remarkably prescient tweet last November.
Thanks, Tucker. You know, to me, it was just kind of, I thought it was just an open secret. I'd heard stories and rumors about Schneiderman for years. I'd been told by at least 3 or 4 different people since maybe 2009 that he is into rough sex with women, that he likes to date his staffers and is a little pushy with them, that he tried to kidnap a reporter and wouldn't let her out of his car on the way to, and said he was taking her to his apartment. So I sort of assumed that this was just, you know, common knowledge, more or less. Now, I'm not deeply involved in Albany politics or in New York City Democratic circles. I'm an editor for a moderately conservative magazine.
So you're not exactly in the loop at the highest levels of progressive New York, is what you're saying.
No, exactly. So that's why it seemed strange that everyone was saying, oh my God, this is the craziest thing we've ever heard.
But it's clearly not. I mean, so that you raise a really, I think, central question, which is, if you heard about it, is it plausible that the governor of the state, one of his closest allies, presumably one of his closest friends, Andrew Cuomo, had never heard of it?
It seems implausible to me. I mean, it seems implausible to me that any elected official in New York State hadn't heard it. I don't know what I can say. I mean, Andrew Cuomo has been, steeped in New York State politics for 40 years. He basically has a private army. He keeps tabs on everything and everyone. He's extraordinarily paranoid.
Yes, I know.
So I would imagine that he would know everything that everybody's up to at all times.
He's a thoroughly bizarre person. I've dealt with him. No, I agree. That's exactly the word that comes to mind, and I don't use it lightly. He's paranoid. He's a control person. There's no doubt. So this is a little strange, though, because Schneiderman was the attorney general. He wasn't just some functionary. He wasn't the night city editor at the Daily News. I mean, he was the chief law enforcement officer of the state. So if there's a suggestion that he kidnapped somebody, you'd think that one of his peers would follow up on it.
Well, you might think so, but at the same time, the New York State Attorney General has unique powers and is an immensely powerful figure. I don't think any Attorney General any state Attorney General across the country has the kind of power that the New York Attorney General does. However, if you notice, over the last few years in New York State and New York City, there's been a lot of corruption investigations.
Yes.
But he has not been leading them. They've all been largely done by the feds. There's trials going on in Albany right now over, Sheldon Silver is going to be retried. Right. A number of Cuomo's associates, just where Joe Prococo was just convicted. This was federal. And in New York City, investigations of Bill de Blasio were largely being done by the federal government.
It's kind of funny. Meanwhile, this guy's suing everyone about global warming.
Global warming,
right.
Or coming up with ways to have pardon-proof indictments of Trump associates, or suing the vitamin industry. Yeah. Or
meanwhile, the cesspool around him goes unaddressed. Seth, thank you for that dispatch from New York. Not heartening, but fascinating.
Thanks, Tucker.
Democrats suppressing abuse claims to cover a political ally is obviously nothing new. In the 1990s, allegations that were a conspiracy, that's what Hillary Clinton said, not take it seriously. Watch.
The great story here, for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it, is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president.
Okay, so normal people laughed at that. It's a famous piece of tape because it's absurd. And of course, it's a diversion. And yet that remained Hillary Clinton's position for 20 more years. How did she get away with that? Well, with the complicity of our news media. Here's ABC's Tom Lamas. He was quick to dismiss any allegations against Bill Clinton as unfounded. Watch.
In another case, it's about groping and fondling and touching against a woman's will.
And rape.
And rape.
The rape accusation is decades old and discredited.
Decades old, huh? It doesn't matter. And discredited by whom? We never found out from ABC. Here's over at NBC, Andrea Mitchell. Similar view.
Donald Trump using that word unprompted, bringing up a discredited and long-denied accusation against former President Bill Clinton, dating back to 1978 when he was Arkansas Attorney General.
In point of fact, just as a reporter, it was never discredited. And if there was a specific way in which it was discredited, then I suppose those correspondents would have told us what it was. Meanwhile, over at CNN, Brooke Baldwin said, reading from the same script, attacking Bill Clinton as a sexual predator, not acceptable. Watch.
Dozens of women, by the way, that her husband has maligned and assaulted, paying Paula Jones off $850,000 for hush money.
Okay, let's not go there. She has a history of being abusive towards women, specifically the ones that her husband's had extramarital affairs with. So I think it's very hypocritical.
That's where you're going to go in the first 20 seconds?
Yeah, let's not go there, bringing up abused women. Please, come on. So yesterday, Heather McDonald is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a contributing editor at City Journal, one of the great writers in English, I would say, and she joins us tonight. What do you make of this, Heather McDonald?
Well, this is a war, Tucker, and each side, frankly, let's be honest, will protect its own.
That's true.
But what's remarkable is that the left goes so far to protect its own when they already control most of the power centers of our culture. They control the universities, they control the media. So you'd think they could afford to sacrifice a few in the name of principle, but they're holding on to them. What I fear about this moment, one would hope that it would maybe slow down the Me Too movement, and unfortunately it's only going to solidify it. We're going to see growing gender quotas. Of course, there's already calls that the replacement for Schneiderman has to be a female. And we've had male power, male ego, male abuse throughout human history. The solution until the 1960s and the sexual liberation culture was through norms of chivalry and female modesty to try and control that. We decided that that was oppressive and patriarchal. We threw out those norms, and you have this extraordinary behavior on Schneiderman's part, fueled by alcohol, and there's very few norms left, it seems, to control this sort of predatory behavior.
I guess a couple points come to mind. One, did you notice the immediate broadening of the responsibility? Governor Cuomo of New York, first statement, this speaks to the problem that all men pose. This is the fault of all men. That seems to me exactly what you said, which is fuel to continue what is basically a political push called Me Too.
Right. You are going to have the disappearing of men gradually, and it is not going to be a good thing for our culture. There is toxic masculinity is a concept that is embraced by the left. It applies to a few men, not all men. But we are trying to now basically erase the male from our culture, and that's a big mistake.
Can I ask you this? I mean, in the 27 years I've been in the workforce, maybe it's just me, I've seen some terrible male bosses, but it's not always true that female supervisors treat women better than male supervisors do. I just haven't noticed that, to be honest with you, at all, actually.
To the contrary, I think there's somewhat of a consensus in the workplace that female bosses can be absolute hell. And also, let's not pretend for women, and let's not pretend that women do not exploit their sexual attractiveness to the hilt.
When can we stop lying? Is there a date at which we can stop lying, or do we have to keep pretending things?
We can stop lying if universities get back to truth-telling, and we can start being honest about differences between men and women. But to do that, we have to take the universities back, and we certainly have to take the media back.
Amen. Heather McDonald, I never miss a piece. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders joins us from the North Lawn at the White House, and we're looking at all of these images. Sarah, good evening, first of all, and thanks so much for being here. It's great to have you with us. You know, what do you think about the fact that while that mission was going on, while Mike Pompeo was in North Korea trying to free these three men and advance this meeting, this is the headline that the New York Times put out about the Secretary of State. I would call it kind of snarky. It says, at a key moment, Trump's top diplomat is again thousands of miles away. Your thoughts on that, Sarah?
Look, I addressed this today in the briefing. I think it's shameful what the media sometimes does. I got the same number of questions today about Michael Cohen that I got about North Korea. I think that is sad, and another reminder that shows us just how out of touch the media is with the rest of America. And I think that is a perfect example of just how clueless sometimes the media can be. His top diplomat was thousands of miles away, but what they forgot to include was that he was thousands of miles away negotiating the details of the meeting between the president and Kim Jong-un, as well as bringing three brave Americans back home to the United States. To me, that seems like exactly what his job is supposed to do. He was doing it, and you know what? The president was doing his job back here. This is an administration that likes to get more than one thing done a day. As that you guys know, we stay really busy, and this is going to be a big night, and certainly I think a moment that we are very glad that Secretary Pompeo was away from the United States in order to help make it happen.
They certainly have some egg on their face for that headline, which happens. But I want to play some of the video that we played earlier in the evening here, which is the siren sounds that are blaring over the Golan Heights. Incoming missiles from Syria They've been deflected by the Iron Dome, we understand. But, Sarah, this is clearly of concern, I'm sure, to the president, because the move that he made yesterday in ending the Iranian deal may have ramifications that might be very difficult. And this might be signaling something of what you're going to have to deal with there.
Yeah, this just further shows that the Iranian regime cannot be trusted. Israel absolutely has a sovereign right to defend itself, and we support them in whatever efforts they have in order to defend themselves. But again, I think this activity and this action is just further demonstration that the Iranian regime cannot be trusted, and another good reminder that the president made the right decision to get out of the Iran deal.
I want to play a moment from the president's statement on the Iran deal the other day. With regard to the Iranian people yesterday, it seems like longer ago. Let's play it. I want to ask you a question about this.
I want to deliver a message to the long-suffering people of Iran. The future of Iran belongs to its people. They are the rightful heirs to a rich culture and an ancient land, and they deserve a nation that does justice to their dreams, honor to their history, and glory to God.
Sarah, I guess what I'd love to know about that part of that statement is what message the White House is sending to the people of Iran. Because we all remember a few years back in the Obama administration, there was an uprising in Iran. The people wanted to overthrow the oppressive regime there, and it was not backed by the Obama White House. Is that something that this White House would like to encourage?
Look, the president, I think this was one of the more powerful moments of his remarks yesterday. He reminded the Iranian people that the United States stands with them. One of the most terrible things in this process is how much the Iranian regime has squandered away the wealth and the resources of their country and deprived the people of their country. And the president is simply saying that we're with you, we support you, and we want something better for you. And we hope that that can happen, and that this is part of the process of getting rid of a deal that has not been helpful, that has only empowered the regime. They gave up so much in the previous administration and got nothing. They gave up tough and crippling sanctions in exchange for an incredibly weak deal, and the president is not going to repeat those same mistakes.
We watch in the days and weeks to come, and tonight as we see the plane as it lands at Andrews Air Force Base. Sarah, thank you very much. Great to see you tonight.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me on.